Hello, hello. Thank you everyone for listening to this new Naked Conversation with. Today we have a very interesting topic and it is related to a very questionable election that took place in the International Naturist Federation back in 2016. So today's guest is Hans from New Zealand. Hans was a witness and participated during this election and he has a little bit of insight that we would like to talk about. So for whoever is unfamiliar with the INF or the election process and everything, we are going to do our best to try to explain so you guys can understand what is going on. And during this conversation, we will be talking about a couple of official documents. These official documents should be made available in a link in the description so you guys could download them, follow along, or read them in your own time and have a little bit more information of what took place. So Hans, thank you very much, first of all, for accepting this conversation, this interview. How are you doing today?
You're welcome, Hector. I'm doing fine. It's early morning here in New Zealand. I'm doing great. Thank you for that.
Thank you. And apparently it seems that it's a little bit colder on my end than your end. You seem to be a little bit more comfortable than I am.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, well, I've mentioned this before, but I like to mention this at the beginning of the conversations. It's a naked conversation with, but unfortunately, because of the community guidelines of different platforms where I would like to share this video and information, well, we can't really be completely naked. So that is that. But Hans, yep. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about the participation that you had during the 2016 election. What was your role played during that event?
Yes. So about myself, I'm Hans. I live in New Zealand. I'm originally from the Netherlands. I started nativism when I was 16. And when I came to New Zealand, I joined also a native partner and been sort of involved in nativism since then, on and off with the federation or with clubs and later with the federation. I think I joined, think back, somewhere in around 2014, I think I joined the New Zealand Natives Federation in the executive committee, and I did the role from internet coordinator. And in that role, I was present at the Congress in 2016 to support our president mainly, but also to know what was really going on. Of course, we heard about INF, we read about INF, but there was the opportunity to do it.
Okay, so you were supporting the New Zealand team back then. Did you have any official title? Were you delegate or you?
No, not for the Congress, but at the beginning of the Congress, as they do always, they ask for some scrutineers, the ones who count the votes, together with Claudia, who represented ANNR from America, and me volunteered for that role. Somebody has to do it, and I think, okay, how difficult can it be?
Okay.
Partly was very clear that because you get no instruction at all. Of course, counting votes is not that difficult, but they involve you in all kinds of rules and demand that you know all kinds of rules. Which I had no idea about, and neither had Claudia.
Okay.
So
just so people who are unfamiliar with the process, the International Naturist Federation has a General Assembly every 2 years where they elect different people to serve at the board of directors. There's two boards, the executive board and the council board, if I'm not mistaken, the EC and the CC. I'm not sure if I pronounced the names correctly, but that would be the people who are in charge. And then also all the federations that are represented in the INF send in a delegate. The delegate could be the president, or it could be anyone who they decide to talk on behalf of, or in some cases, they can actually send their votes. They turn in their votes to another federation, so the other federation can vote. Depending on the size of the federation is the amount of votes that they have. The larger federations have around 20 to 30 votes. The smaller federations have 1 to 2 votes. So not all countries vote equally. And as Hans is mentioning, Hans was part of the scrutinizer team, which was the people that were counting the votes. It was him and Claudia that was representative of, or that was working with Anner. Anner, when did Anner pull out of the INF? So they were represented back then in 2016.
Yeah, they didn't have any votes. So the people who are delegates cannot be the scrutineers because they vote. That is quite classical in the voting situation. So they ask people who are watching it, who are there, but you have to be there, of course, during the whole Congress. Every time they go in a meeting, the chances that they're going to vote, so then you have to be ready to vote. Claudia was there. She was not a delegate, definitely, because they were not member of the INF at that moment. What was mentioned is clearly that Claudia tried to get them back involved. In later workshops, she presented like that they had again interest to join, and Claudia was trying to make a pathway to make that happen. So she was, although she was there as a sort of delegate, but not a participating delegate from what's AR, an American Federation, one of the two. So she had not an official title in the meeting as such, but she became a more official life because scrutineers, of course, have an official title in the meeting later on.
And how are the scrutineers elected or chosen? Do they propose, or do they volunteer, or what is the process?
The process is that Jean Peters just asks at the beginning of the meeting he mentions that 2 scrutineers need to be, that they need 2 scrutineers. If there are any volunteers, Claudia straight away volunteered. And then I saw nobody, and I think, now I can do it. So I volunteered.
Okay, so John Peters is the secretary, was the secretary at that time, right? The vice president.
No, his role as secretary, and as a side role about the 3 main characters, say, the 3 normal board members. So you have Sieglinde, which is the president, Rolf, who is the treasurer, and Jean Peters, the secretary.
Okay.
Both Rolf and Jean Peters have a vice president role, where Jean Peters is more doing an active vice president role. That Rolf is not so active in that.
So Sieglinde was president, John Peters was secretary and also vice president, and Rolf was the treasurer and also the vice president. And when the counting process started, John Peters, secretary, said who would like to volunteer, and you and Claudia volunteered to be the people in charge of counting the votes, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, and during this 2016 election, there was an election to choose a new president for the International Naturist Federation. This position lasts for 4 years. So whoever was elected in 2016 is president or was president from 2016 to 2020. And during this election, we had 3 candidates. That is correct. There was Sieglinde, which is the president at the time. I think it's Armand Jamir, that is representative of the French Federation. And I believe that there was a 3rd candidate. Do you remember who the 3rd candidate was?
No, there was only 2.
2 candidates, okay.
2 candidates. At the beginning of the Congress, he had not shown his interest. So, so there was basically only the candidate there was Sieglinde Ivo,
okay,
which was the current president. There were none of those Sieglinde or Jean-Pierre were not during the Congress in the evening. You dine together and that sort of things. They were never present. They went to their own dining places, to their own restaurants.
okay.
And during the evenings, there was talk about that there needed to be another candidate for this role. And during this conversation, Armand pulled forward and basically from the floor, as they call it, Armand made himself available for the role and wanted to do the role. And so at the beginning of the voting, so that part was definitely legal in the rules, is he came from the floor, so, and that's allowed.
So whenever there's no candidate, the federations can propose a candidate, right? And that is before the election is going to take place. So as you mentioned, he was proposed on the floor. So that was before the voting. He stood up, he said, I'm interested in being a candidate, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
And then during this time, I think there was a total of 203 votes. Is that correct?
Correct.
That was the total of the votes accumulated from all of the votes that the federations had. And what happened during the time that they were counting votes? And what is the process of counting the votes? Do people raise their hand? Is it a secret ballot, or how does it work?
So during the whole Congress, all the voting was done by raising the number of votes they had. So there was asked how many are in favor. No, they put the votes up with the number on it. So quite in the beginning, I realized I could best use my cell phone to calculate them all together, because it becomes quite involved with all the different kinds of votes.
Okay.
And Claudia followed that example actually. And so then we had to agree how many were in favor, how many against, sorry, and how many abstained.
Okay.
In the whole voting, so that was during the whole normal voting. For any time during the voting process, they could ask for a secret ballot. And they wanted to have a secret ballot for it. The members could ask for it, and then it became secret ballot voting. The candidate for the they don't call it executives, for the roles in, for the top 3 roles, the votings are always done by secret ballot. So that meant actually, say, for instance, France, where Armand was from, who had 25 votes, they would have a number of notes, and the total amount of those votes would be 25. So they had to write on those little pieces of papers the name they want. So in this case, or Armand or Sieglinde, or say abstain. They could say abstain, but on all those pieces of paper. So it was not that you got one piece of paper with 25 on it, because then Gloria and me could recognize who had voted that number of points. So they have given them 3 and 5 and 6 and till a number of votes that it was totaled 25.
Okay, so let me recap on that just to make sure that I understand correctly. The way that people vote is each federation has a certain amount of votes. Whenever they ask all in favor for a certain candidate, they would raise the amount of votes, and you and Claudia as scrutineers would have to count how those votes were, or towards who were those votes. Is that correct? And there's also the
not completely.
No, okay,
not completely, because there was they had little slips, little notes with a different kind of
secret ballots, right? If some of the members requested that they wanted to vote anonymously, they would receive a amount of votes that equal the votes that they have, and they would choose secretly who they wanted their vote to go towards. And whenever they count the votes, they would count who those votes were for. But since if a country has 25 votes and you see a number with 25, then you know who the country was. So that's not secret. So it would be divided by 3, 5, 2, or whatever, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So it was a random number which equal to that amount. And and for, of course, for those roles like the president and also later for the treasurer, which was also the same, those were all done secret. We came around to the box, they threw the slips in the box, and so after the process, we just took the slips out, split them out, first looked at who voted for what, so you basically make 2 stacks, or 3, should do 3 stacks, but nobody abstains. So there was 2 stacks, and then you start to count all those different numbers on those slips, and you check together if you're agreeing, and if the total amount comes, of course, to that 203. Just look at my notes.
So did all the countries decide to vote on a secret ballot, or?
You have to. There's one or the other. There's or a secret ballot or not a secret ballot.
Okay.
When one country says, I want to have a secret ballot,
everyone has secret ballots.
And for those roles, it's always a secret ballot. There's no option. That's always.
Okay. So just to make sure that the audience understands, whenever the election for president was going to take place, there was a country that requested secret ballots. So everyone voted during that time with a secret ballot. Or, well, no.
When it is voted for president, treasurer, or secretary, those roles, that's always a secret ballot. Never.
Always secret ballot. My mistake.
Yeah.
So in this time, you guys gave the votes to all of the countries. The countries wrote down who they were voting for. And then, do you remember what the result of this election was?
Yeah, the vote was 104 for Armand and 99 for Sieglinde, which is a total of 203 votes.
Okay, so during this, that would be the total. 104 plus 99 would equal 203. That was the total amount of votes. No one abstained during this election, right? No abstained.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, correct.
And so after this election took place, how did Sieglinde, who had lost this election, react to it?
Yeah, let's go back a little step back first, because we counted, of course, the votes. The meeting goes very well. We are counting the votes. And then we quite quickly came already to, because she presented to St. Peter's, with the result, we got told off that we didn't know the process because it had to go into an envelope, and we didn't know that it had to go in an envelope, and we didn't have an envelope. So where is INF giving us an envelope for that? But so what was said is that it is 99. So Claudia said it to him in German. I could hear because both speak best German. She says, total result. I was standing just 2 meters, 1 to 2 meters behind that. And she says it's 99. and 104, which makes a total of 204. And then Jan Peters was doing very difficult about that and putting a lot of pressure on it, and then somehow became 99 and 103. He wrote down 9903, and I saw him writing it down, and then I corrected it. And so
John
that
Peters
was fun.
Heard from Claudia that it was 99 and 104, but he said it was 103. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, he wrote down 99 and 103.
But Claudia said it was 99, 104, and the result was 203.
Which makes a total of 203.
Okay.
And that total of 203, he made 103
and
for a month.
When he wrote down the numbers, what numbers did he write down? Did he write 99 and 104?
99 and 103.
Okay.
And then I stepped in and corrected it, and Claudia confirmed there and then that that was the correct numbers of what I was telling him.
Okay, so he made a mistake. He wrote down 103. You intervened to tell him that there was a mistake. Claudia confirmed that there was a mistake on John Peters' end. Did he correct that mistake?
Yeah, he corrected it when he, on the end, I'm almost sure when he presented the numbers, otherwise I would have intervened.
Okay.
When he presented the votes, that it was the correct numbers.
And you mentioned that there was that he was upset with the process because you and Claudia were supposed to put those votes in an envelope that they never provided, right?
No. So there is a legal counsel, or a representative of the legal counsel present. Which was Paul, and he is also he's Kiwi, New Zealander, and he's member of that club. Because there was no envelope to put in, he raced off to find an envelope quickly, and which is actually not very correct because he needs to make sure that everything is done legally to the rules of the federation. But of course, yeah, as a good heart, you race off and do such a thing. And he came back with 2 envelopes for us. However, Jan Peters thinks that 2 volunteers from the floor will have an envelope, a number of envelopes with them.
You would have an envelope just in case you needed to count votes.
Yeah. I think that it actually shows how basically arrogant, I would say, this whole process is by the INF. Because clearly nobody would have envelopes with them when they go to a Congress, or they are really putting in their mind, oh, we're going to be the scrutineers.
Yes.
Then you have to also know that you need envelopes.
Of course. If the Federation is the one who is responsible for providing those, they're responsible for the ones following the rules, because the people who are volunteering to count votes aren't always prepared with an envelope.
Correct.
Okay. So once this was, once you corrected John Peters, did he announce the result of the election?
Yeah. So it is basically, we presented it's not over the microphone, and then it needs to be officially because it's recorded, and but also that everybody hears it very clearly. But there's also 3 translators there. They need to hear it and translate it in the other 2 languages, being French and German. Or the 3 languages: English, French, and German. Yeah. Which are translated.
For people who are unfamiliar with this, the International Naturist Federation has 3 official languages, the languages that Hans just mentioned to us. And every time someone speaks, there has to be a translation to the rest of the federations in either English or German or French, depending on the language that the other person speaks. They provide a headset and people can listen to the translation in real time. So everyone heard that the new president with 104 votes was Armand, and Sieglinde had 99 votes. Everyone agreed?
Yeah.
Okay. So there was no question during this time that anything went wrong with the results. Everyone agreed that everything was done correctly and that this was the official result.
Yeah, one strange thing, what happens during those elections, and I think I need to mention that because it has been part of the documents afterwards, is that the candidates disappear. So that's not so much a problem for Sieglinde because he is the president and has no votes during the Congress. But for Armand, who was the delegate for France, it is a kind of problem because on that moment his sidekick, I think his name was Bernard, stepped in and voted for him. That is the letter of the rules not allowed. But they also sort of force Armand to go away during the elections. So there is some call, or he needs to be said to him, no, you should stay here because you need to vote. And then you go away, or either or. But it was not said because, and you cannot take the votes for France away because some part of this that is not a rule. It is done in a certain way that the candidates walk away during the election.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, when they're going to vote, the candidates are not present in the room, but in this occasion, Armand happened to be the representative or the delegate of France. So he was supposed to be present because he was the one in charge of voting on behalf of France. But they asked him to step away. So it's confusing because he's supposed to be present to vote, but he's supposed to be absent because he's a candidate. And then what happened with those votes? You can't take away the votes from France, obviously, because Armand is the candidate. So who was responsible for those votes? How did they handle that situation?
Yeah, so there was no mention that that was a legal doing. So Bernard, I think his name was Bernard, so forgive me when that's not the correct name. But Bernard was there also as a sidekick for him, somebody who like I support our president, supported him during this process. He stepped in and voted on behalf of France.
Okay.
And that is, of course, because the system is not on paper, that is not the 100% real time. I think it doesn't make no difference. As soon as you sort of say from he has to go away, then he should be somebody else or something else should be facilitated for that.
Did the secretary, who clearly should be aware of the rules, did he say anything about Armand leaving the room and having someone else vote on behalf of France? Was he
not during the Congress?
He didn't say anything during the Congress. So the person who is aware and responsible to follow the guidelines should have been aware of this, and he would have provided some type of solution that the federations would agree upon, right? Because if the by rules don't have anything, or I'm not sure if they do, but if the by rules don't say anything about this, then the federations, the General Assembly, who is the maximum representative, or the person, the body who is in charge of the federation, would have the opportunity to solve this problem, right? But no one was against this.
No, so in principle, that was the role for the legal counsel, and that was Paul. And Paul didn't say anything, and neither did John say anything. During the elections, they clearly saw it, and and it's actually not in the rules to be not present. So it's a step away, to step outside the room. It is not, there's a sort of polite thing to do.
It's
it
a
is
tradition.
not that it is not a rule, but the other part was a rule.
So the tradition to leave the room is that. It's a tradition. It's not anything that the rules would require you to do. But the fact that the delegate is the only person who is responsible for the votes, that is in the rules. Is that what you just said?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's correct.
And both the legal counsel and the secretary and the treasurer, or all three, they were all aware of this, and no one ever appealed, right? No one was against Armand leaving.
No.
Did Armand request authorization to leave the votes for Bernard to vote?
No. It was mentioned to him that he was, so people said to him, because he didn't straight away leave, so sort of Sieglinde started to leave, and then it was told to him by the other delegates near him that it was done, that he steps away. Then I saw him talking quickly to Bernard, and Bernard stepped in and sat on his chair, basically. He was basically told, and he was improvising quickly on the situation occurring, and I think nobody thought too deeply about it. It was very quickly. It happened again with the treasurer role, which came after that, and exactly the same way of acting.
Okay. Did Armand step out for the treasurer, or did the person who had the votes for the treasurer step out?
Yeah, so for the treasurer, it was Rolf, the current treasurer, and he was the treasurer, and he's still the treasurer because there's been no election yet. And the other candidate was Wendy, which was the delegate from New Zealand.
Okay.
She stepped out, and actually my partner, who was the internet coordinator for New Zealand, which is not even executive role in New Zealand. So she stepped into that role for her, basically just as illegal as it was with Bernard, but that had been accepted.
Okay, so let's continue the story so people don't get confused.
Yeah.
So after the result is announced, everyone agrees that everything was done correctly, and then the assembly finishes. Do you remember if there was anything unusual in their response? Were they upset? Did they not agree with the result or anything like that?
Sieglinde was definitely upset. Definitely. So was the partner of Jean Peters, which was the delegate for Germany. It's a bit strange because he's from Luxembourg. They were both very upset. Sieglinde was what they call here throwing the toys out of the cot. So it's like a baby throws, when the baby is upset, they throw the dolls and that sort of things out of the cot. That is what she was really sort of formally closing the meeting, but she was clearly, no, when you guys want it, you guys can have it, and I don't care anymore. She was really, really.
She wasn't happy with the result. She was clearly upset. And did the assembly go on as usual after that, or did it end early, or did anything different happen?
No, partly. I don't know anything differently happy because that I've not been at any of the other congresses, so that's hard for me to say. I cannot have an opinion about it.
Was the election the last thing that happened during that assembly, or did other things take place after that?
So basically what went, and it was almost finished. The election for the president was first. After that, the election of the treasurer was there. So that was handed off, not off, sorry. And then closing, few formalities, and then closing. It was not like it lasted, it was maybe half an hour after, at max, after that election. Yeah, so I would say it was more or less almost the last bit of the meeting, besides the treasurer election, which was there anything. Oh, after the sorry, after the election. Sorry.
It's okay.
After the election.
Want to get some water?
Yeah. Yeah, it's after the election. So after the whole Congress, basically, or at the end of the whole Congress, the official meeting, there was a workshop for everybody who was interested. They were definitely not interested in that, because they left after straight away. So were all the, yeah, I would say that their group, they none of the really I would say more conservative countries, they all left. The more progressive countries came all to the workshop. Armand came also to the workshop, but he only listened. He said, I'm now president, I'm going to listen in. So that was after the meeting. There was a little time gap, I think of an hour or so, between the meeting and the workshop. And in that time, at least Sieglinde and Jan Peters and partners were brought back to the other camp where they stayed. And it was done by me as well. So I was the one who brought them back, because there was extra transport needed and I had my car there. So I brought them to that. So they sat in the back of my car.
Okay. So the election finishes. Sieglinde loses the election. Armand wins. There was a couple of conferences or workshops going on after that. All the conservative countries decide to leave. They don't agree with the result. They leave, and they need someone to drive them to where they were staying. You mentioned that you volunteered because you had your car there, and you took them. They went in the back of your car. Is there anything notable that happened during the time that you were driving them to the place where they were staying?
Yeah, so they were talking in German. And me being from the Netherlands, we don't speak German, but our language is very close, and we hear German in the Netherlands very often, so we understand German very well. They were talking German. The wife from St. Peters was very upset, was crying in the car, and the only thing what Sieglinde was very worried about, if the lease had been extended for the INF office, which is in the same building complex as he lives in.
So in the car, it was Sieglinde, it was Jean Peters and his wife. They were upset, and Sieglinde was worried about what was going to happen to the lease, that is the rent of the space where the INF has its official offices. That actually happens to be where Sieglinde lives. So there, we could say that there's seems to be a conflict of interest. She didn't want to lose the election because she didn't want to lose money from the Federation to pay for that lease in case the future president decided to change where the office was going to be at, right?
The reason I can only guess, like you're guessing at the moment, we can only guess what the reason is. What was very clear on some, I was wondering why she was so upset. So I found out where she was living, where also her daughter is living, which works for the INF. And
do you know how much of the lease is the INF paying for? Is it paying for the full thing?
No.
You don't know?
I know for the office they pay for the full thing, but there is some kind of my feeling, and that's just my feeling, is that there is some kind of conflict. There is three things going on. So Sieglinde is also president of the Austria Federation.
Mm-hmm.
Her daughter works for the INF, and as well the daughter as herself live in the same apartment complex as the Federation official bureau is where they have their office. It's the same, exactly the same.
Is it the
apartment complex?
Is it the same apartment, or is it just in the same complex?
Because it is in the same complex.
Because, for example,
so the daughter has her own apartment, she has her apartment, and the office, I think it's just also an apartment in the same complex.
So it's not the apartment where they live in. It's just an apartment within the same complex.
Yeah. What Sieglinde was saying was very worried about that at least that lease had been extended for another 5 years.
Wow.
So, and that was her main concern in the car. That was very clearly, that was her main concern.
Okay. And you mentioned that her daughter was employed by the INF. Is she a paid staff? Does she receive a salary from the INF?
Yeah. Okay. As far as I know, that's the case. I cannot.
Yeah, we might need to confirm this information with other sources that are more aware of the finances of the INF. But the reason that I ask is because it's important if you are receiving a clear benefit from an institution. I don't understand why she would raise a lease for 5 years. It seems to me that the only reason, if you're in an election and you know that you have the possibility of losing that election, it would seem a little bit dumb to raise a 5-year lease if there's uncertainty. I would prefer to wait to see if I win the election and if the next board of directors agrees with where the election is, because that could be changed. But I'm not going to sign a 5-year contract and then go into an election that I'm not sure I'm going to win unless I was sure I was going to win.
My guess is as good as your guess. What was very clear is that Jean Peters had extended the lease just, I think, in the weeks before that the Congress was going on. Mm-hmm. That was very clear from his answers. Yeah, so I agree with what you're saying.
We're just speculating. We honestly don't know, but it doesn't make sense that that would happen. I don't see any logic behind that unless I'm sure that that's not going to change. And when it comes to elections, we're never sure that's not going to change.
Yeah, that is correct. And being it also 5 years, which the elections are every 4 years.
Yeah.
So the period is not consistent with the election time in that sense. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much was left of the lease term, so it was on top of what was left for the lease term already.
So it could have been 6 years or more.
Who knows?
We don't. Okay. So they were.
The other part. The other part was when we drove further. There was also that came more about the upsetness from the wife of Jean Peters, and a comment which was made by the husband of Sieglinde, which was also in the car.
That's a big car. You have 4 people in the car.
We have five persons easily fit in my car.
Okay.
Sieglinde Jean Peters made a comment out of that. Don't worry, I will make something happen.
Okay. That
in
sounds
German. I will, don't worry. Basically, I will make sure
I'll take care of it.
This. I have this under control. I will make something. And
wow.
That was very clearly said.
That does sound arrogant. That does sound arrogant.
So, yeah, I think we come on that a little bit later, but basically, in an email afterwards with Jean Peters, he made out that I don't understand German, I don't speak German, I don't understand German.
Yeah. I think they believe the same thing about me in English. One of the objections of John Peters when I launched my candidacy from Mexico to be the I think it's called Defender of Naturism. I don't know why they came up with that name, but I was running for the position. And one of his objections, he didn't really object my candidacy, but one of the objections was that I don't understand English. And I guess we've been talking for about an hour now, and I think that I can handle the language. So yeah. I guess it has to do with an assumption that people, because they're from a certain country, don't understand the language. But he was assuming that clearly when he said that he was going to take care of it, that they had nothing to worry about.
There were people there, and there was also mentioned during the Congress. I think it was the representative, and I think he was from Brazil.
He was
from memory, from Brazil, and he brought up that so we get translation into German, we get translation into France, which is fair, maybe seeing the European situation, but certainly German is not a world language.
No.
While I think they speak Portuguese in Brazil, but my experience, a lot of the Portuguese-speaking people are understanding Spanish reasonably well. While Spanish isn't a world language, there's no translation in Spanish. So, and there is quite the number of countries which speak Portuguese or Spanish are increasing. So, but no facilitating for that.
Okay. So they had the conversation in the car, and what happened after that?
So I went back to the place where the Congress was held. It was the Wellington Club. And after that, we had our workshop where Armand was present as president. Everybody could step in, so also non-delegates could start to speak in the workshop. And we had actually a very interesting, so the 3 days or 4 days of the official meeting were not that interesting. The 2 hours from the workshop were very interesting because there the real points of problems with promoting naturism came aboard. And one of the roles the INF got tasked with was to contact the Facebooks, the Googles, the Microsofts about the problems we're experiencing with promoting our lifestyle. So that is very, I don't think anything will have been done with it. Armand said, I'm now president, I'm present, and I only listen. I absorb what your guys' concern is, what a president should do.
Okay. So after that, Armand was wanting to listen and build a relationship with the federations, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And much later, actually not that much later, so I know Sieglinde and partner, Jean Peters and partner, went to another place in New Zealand for a little holiday together. Maybe some more countries joined them there. And there was also the time that suddenly a letter was written to protest about this election.
What dates did the 2016 New Zealand Congress took place? Do you remember?
Not exactly. It was in November, I think, something like second week or third.
November 2016. Yeah, that's the only important thing. And then you said that after that there was a complaint.
Yeah, there was a letter allegedly by some countries, which they complained about the process of the elections, mainly the election for president. There was not so much concern raised about the treasurer's election because the outcome was that Rolf was still the treasurer. But mainly for the presidency, there was a lot of, by a few countries, it was raised that suddenly they had some concerns.
Okay. I think this is one of the documents that I will include. It's the INF FNI Legal Counsel Order that is dated on December 20th, 2016. And it says that there was a complaint from the Italian Naturist Federation, the Austrian Naturist Federation. There was a complaint from John Peters, a complaint from Liechtenstein. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I'm not, excuse me. And there was a complaint from Sieglinde. And here it stipulates the conversation and the complaint that was taking place. So do you remember what were the reasons that they complained for?
One of the reasons was, at least why I reacted on, because I've seen that letter also, is that we had said that there were about the 103 and 104 number of votes. And that the scrutineers were apparently in disagreement about the votes of the presidential elections. We were not in disagreement. There was some big confusion created about the number of votes, as we said before. Accordingly, I just reread it now. Accordingly, Jan Peters has also mentioned first, on the official recording, the 103 votes and not the 104 votes. If that had happened, I definitely would have made sure that it was 104 mentioned after that.
So
it was
John Peters,
very confusing situation.
You mentioned earlier when we were talking about the total amount of votes, the total amount was 203, and it was 104 for Armand, 99 for Sieglinde. You said that when John Peters heard the number, he heard 103, and you corrected him. So he was complaining that there was a discrepancy in the amount of votes, which is in fact incorrect. As you mentioned, you correct him, Claudia corrected him, and he wrote down 104, right?
Yeah. So they make out now that there was a disagreement between the scrutineers about the number of votes. But between Claudia and me. But it was not a disagreement. There was just a big confusion going on, created by Jan Peters himself.
Okay.
And you would expect then the legal counsel to contact both scrutineers when this accusation is made, if that's correct or not correct. But neither Claudia nor me got contacted by the legal counsel.
And you and Claudia actually happened to write a letter, right? Where you informed that there was no discrepancy, there was no confusion, that the only person who heard wronged votes was John Peters, and you and Claudia agreed in the 104 and 99. Because according to John Peters, in a letter that he sends, he says that there was a discrepancy and there's a huge confusion that only involves one vote, and it's now impossible to decide who had the majority of the votes. Is that correct?
That's correct. When we wrote the letter, we did it actually also with advice, because there was somebody of the legal council present, which was Paul, which is New Zealand as well. Claudia was at that moment in New Zealand, was still in New Zealand. So the three of us had a little meeting and talked about it. We decided, Claudia and me decided that we would write a letter. Paul had read the letter before we have sent it out. He was there present as legal counsel. Neither him has been contacted by the president of the legal council, which handled this. This is a friend of Jean Peters.
But I have a question. This legal counsel, does the authority that the legal counsel supposedly have appear in the statutes? Do you know? It does?
Yeah.
So what authority does the legal counsel have to do here?
They basically, when one of the roles is to make sure that everything during the Congress is during the meeting is happened in a legal, according to the rules, basically.
And that's why they're present, right? That's why
why they're present. So they have always a representative there. That was not the person who dealt with this complaint. That was a different person. So the person present was Paul, and Paul had nothing to do with this complaint. You would think when he was the one present during the meeting that he would handle this complaint, but it was not done that way.
Okay, and there's another reason that he appears to dispute. He says that the elections in New Zealand regarding the votes for president are not to be considered as legal due to the fact that the votes from Sweden and Norway were passed to Denmark and later on passed to a third country. Do you know anything about this?
Yeah, I know about this. I was basically almost sitting behind the delegate of Denmark. He had to leave early because of his flight. He was basically the votes from Sweden and Norway were handed to him. And he instructed, he did give, I believe, one set of votes. It's basically 3 sets of votes: Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. He asked when he had to leave, he excused himself, he had to leave. He asked if he could hand over his votes and the votes of Sweden and Denmark to somebody else. And it was off microphone. Very technically, Jean Peters turns his microphone on and off. That was very clear to me. Off microphone, he said, "You do what you have to do." There was no objections. He was, I don't know how you would call that, but he was not happy what was happening there with him leaving early, I guess. And he sort of, let's say, blasé from, you do what you have to do. Also, Paul didn't intervene on that moment with saying, hold on, this is not legal. Or legal, it is not that strict, but it is federation, also for the national federation, it's not a country. But Paul didn't say, this is not correct according to the rules, you cannot do that.
Yeah.
One was handed, I believe, to Thailand, representative. One was handed to the New Zealand representative, when I'm correct, at least it was spread between 3 counts, and they got all the instructions who to vote for during the elections. It was very clear. He did give instructions to those persons. I want to vote for this person, and I want to vote for that country, go to that person. Mm-hmm. So per country, the instructions were different. He handed out for Sweden, wasn't different than Norway and Denmark. Later on, from a later on discussion, I understand it would have not been no different in the number of votes, because the only dispute was about Sweden and Norway, because it was handed over from one country to the other country, which was not allowed.
So basically, the person that left had the votes for 2 countries, and he told everyone that he had to go. He asked John Peters if he could hand the votes. John Peters said, "Do whatever you need to do." So he turns around and he gives the votes to another country, and he tells them that they have to vote for different people. So this country is going to vote for this candidate, this country is going to vote for that candidate, and I have to leave. During that time, legal counsel was present, John Peters was present, and no one objected.
Correct.
Okay, and this is one of the reasons why he states in the letter, he says, according to the statutes, this is not allowed, and the legal counsel therefore decides that Swedish and Norwegian votes are not to be counted in the election. So basically, he annuls the right for these countries to vote. And he says, due to this fact, it is impossible to decide who had most votes and therefore who has been elected president. So under this letter, what they're basically doing is they're complaining about a discrepancy that didn't exist in the counting of the votes. And they're protesting that a country who specified that they needed to go ask for permission to hand out the votes, was granted that permission by the secretary, John Peters, decided to leave. And now, because of these 2 reasons, apparently both of those reasons were an error on John Peters' behalf. He was the person who was in the middle of these decisions because he was a secretary and because he never complained and because he gave verbal authorization. And now we need to run another election. That's basically what this document says. And now whoever was elected president before and whoever lost the election no longer matters, because we're going to have to do this again. And then, and the legal counsel, or I'm not sure if it's the board of directors, one of them decides that there has to be a second election in Vienna in 2017. Is that correct? And in the meantime, I think in the meantime, Sieglinde will remain being president because, well, there's uncertainty and she needs to take care of the situation, which would... Go ahead.
Yeah, you're mainly correct. So part of it is indeed Jean Peters. He gives the permission off microphone. That is what needs to be said very clearly. Paul, who is the legal counsel representative there, had not interfered then to say, hold on, I need to look this up, or hold on, this is not allowed. One or the 2. Neither has been done. So it has been accepted during the election, and afterwards, when they don't like the result, there's some protest coming. So it is clearly that they didn't like the result because Sieglinde and Jean Peters has signed that letter as well, which were also the representatives of those countries which are having a major role in the countries who protested. Sieglinde is the president of Austria. Jean Peters is the president of Luxembourg, when I'm correct, at that moment. They were not the representatives, but they were the presidents of those countries. Okay. the point from which was made about Claudia and me, that has been not that has been thrown to the side. It's not been mentioned anymore. But when the legal counsel threw it out, it was pure on the points of what happened about the Norwegian and Norwegian and Swedish vote, which was held by Denmark, and Denmark was the country who had to leave early. So the handing off from Denmark was legal. The handing off from the votes which Denmark held for Norway and for Sweden was not allowed. It's basically said. Which can be true, and indeed they decide to have a complete, so the cost is enormous. So they were prepared to fly everybody over on their coast to Vienna. This is not the easiest country to fly in.
Why did they choose Vienna? Any idea?
Vienna is Austria.
Okay.
Austria is where the office is.
So that's where Sieglinde lives.
Yeah.
Okay.
And where the INF is based, because it's the same country as.
Which is another questionable decision, right? I don't like the results of the election. I'm going to, through several legal discrepancies that I came up with, tell the legal counsel to annul this result. There's actually a document here that I'm going to include as well that is dated on November 25th, 2016, where they explain, or John Peters explains, why he considers that this was basically an election that did not follow the rules, which is funny because the rules were actually under his authority, because since Sieglinde stepped out, he assumed as president. So basically what he's doing in this letter, and this is my personal opinion, is confessing his negligence. He's confessing that he was a negligent person who didn't know how to follow the rules back then, but now because I don't like the result, we're going to do something about it. And then what do they decide to do? Well, they decide to have a second election in Vienna that happens to be the home of Sieglinde, who was the president who lost this election, who didn't like the results. What happens during the election in Vienna, which is also very interesting? I think in this case, there was a total of 3 candidates, right? Is that correct? This time?
I cannot remember if it was 3 candidates. I know that Amal was still standing. So in this whole process of after the elections and deciding, Armand was involved. He has been flown to, or traveled at least to Austria a few times, 1 or 2 meetings at least. And the result was that, yeah, the only thing he could agree with is that it was a re-election. So there was not much choice then to agree with that. So but the candidates needs to be approved by the 3. So the both Jean Peters, Rolf, and Sieglinde need to approve the candidates. When you play,
which is funny.
This is funny, indeed, because basically they had thrown the candidacy from Armand out that it was illegal on some basis. I cannot remember exactly, though they found a basis.
Yeah, there's another document that says that there's the candidates. It's Sieglinde Ivo, or Ivo, I don't know how to pronounce her name.
Ivo,
Armand Jamer and Greg Serro, or I don't know. I'm sorry. Sorry if I mispronounced the name. Here, they're stipulating with, who was the candidate, if it was received within the deadline. According to this, Sieglinde was received during the deadline. She was perfect. Armand was yes and no, because according to this, he sent the email at 11:59. So it was 1 minute before the deadline. So they said that he did meet it, but there was a discrepancy between him and John Peters, because John Peters received it before the deadline, and they were able to prove that because of a minute he did. So I think this is a ridiculous attitude on the INF's behalf, that they're trying to find reasons in order to not accept a candidacy. And I honestly think it's ridiculous for the person who is running for a position also to decide whether the other candidates are valid or not. I think the whole electoral process should be handled by a separate organ that has nothing to do with the board of directors, because there's clearly a conflict of interest. And this is my opinion. The next thing is that they said that Greg Serro did not meet the deadline. There's another part that talks about the program. According to this, Sieglinde and Armand did have a program, but Greg didn't. And they have another thing that is ridiculous to me that has to be translated into 3 languages. Now, I don't know the statutes, but I'm pretty sure the statutes does not say that a document has to be in 3 languages in order to be valid. And if it does, I think it's stupid. That's my opinion. But according to this, the program that Sieglinde put was in 3 languages, German, English, and French. The one that Armand did was only in English and French. So this is another reason why he was not accepted. And at the end, it was which federation proposed a candidate. According to this, ONV, I'm not sure what country that is. I guess it's...
I think Krakis was the candidate from Australia.
Yeah, well, I think it was Austria. What country is Sieglinde from? Austria, right?
Austria. So Austria is... that is what Sieglinde was,
so Sieglinde
because
here,
he's the president.
As the president of the Austrian Federation, nominated herself, which is valid according to this.
Yeah.
It says that Armand, which happened to be the president of the French Federation back then, right?
Yeah.
So he proposed himself as Sieglinde did, but they don't consider him to be under the French Federation. They consider him to be a private, which doesn't make sense. It's the same as Sieglinde. And then there was the third candidate that was proposed by the INF. I think it's the...
Australia.
Australian.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the reason why they decided that the only valid candidate was Sieglinde. The rest of the candidates were not valid. So this is funny. You don't like the results, you find a legal way to annul the election, and then you run another election, but the only person who is capable or a valid candidate is Sieglinde, which happens to be the current president at that time. Okay, you guys can read the documents in the description below. And then, then they have the minutes of, it was voted, and to our surprise, Sieglinde got the majority of the votes. So Sieglinde was elected president for another 4 years. And then there's a gap there of a year in her lease. So something that is interesting to mention, and I'm going to be very transparent about this. I'm very upset because the same thing that they did in 2016, they're doing it now in 2020. They're using the pandemic as an excuse in order to postpone the elections. The first thing that they did was move it from October 2020. They moved it to March 2021. But because of the uncertainty of the situation, they have now decided, the 3 leaders of this institution decided that there will be no elections until October 2022, October 2022. So in other words, they're extending their mandate 2 more years because of the pandemic. And none of the countries were requested authorization. The countries are who in essence are in charge of the INF, not the board of directors. But the board of directors has the power to decide whether they will have elections or not, and who can be candidate in those elections, and if they like the results of those elections.
Yes, I'm partly agreeing actually this point with you. The way that this is run is quite ridiculous. They should never have to power, because it goes over their own positions. They should never have the power to decide who is a candidate or who's not a candidate. That's not the right way to do. So that is the first point. I'm agreeing totally with you. The second point you made, the elections in Austria, when there was only one candidate, why do you fly the whole world of federations? New Zealand didn't go, but there's quite some countries flying all the way, and you pay for that with the money which should be used for promoting nativism, and to vote for one candidate, which you already have called basically yourself who the candidate is. So why do you fly everybody to, and why do you go to the expense of having another election? Because it's quite expensive to do that. You need to hire an hotel, you need to accommodate everybody, you need to pay for the flights, all the translators, everything. When you take this quite significant cost, which is fine when there's a whole Congress, but just for this election where there's only one candidate, you know the outcome. You know the outcome. You could have made hundreds of different ways, of hundreds maybe a bit ridiculous, but you could have found a different way to do this.
Yeah, like respecting the results. Like respecting the original election. That would be a great thing that they could have done.
Yeah, so, but you could have built this by ladder or some kind of where people have to make sure. There's different ways to do this. The other way is for where you say now the pandemic, unfortunate situations, and I think I'm quite lucky here in New Zealand because we have hardly had COVID here, and we're quite lucky in this sense. But I think indeed I can understand that you postpone with this current situation we're in worldwide.
I don't understand that because we're in the middle of a technological revolution. We, for example, we had an election, I think it was in June, in the Mexican Federation. It was a similar situation. We normally meet in person for this event, but since the pandemic started, we understood that we needed to change the methodology to do this online. There's a lot of tools to do this. We did this, and it turned out to be a success. There was a new board of directors. I was president when that happened. We organized it, and I did not run for re-election or anything. I decided that I wanted someone else to participate. Other people participated. We have a new board of directors, and everything happened. I think it went great. And you can do this, especially with the resources that the INF has. The INF is against this because of their stupid requirement to translate everything to 3 languages, which in my opinion, I don't agree with it. I think it should be in English. Most of the world speaks English, most of the world understands English, and if you can't, you can provide a translator for who doesn't. But having to do this 3 languages simultaneously for everything that happens in the Federation, I think it's a big waste of resources. And the languages are arbitrary because, as you mentioned, German, who speaks German? The board of directors speak German. No one else speaks German.
Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Liechtenstein.
How much of the world?
There are a few countries, but most of those countries, they spoke perfectly to me.
And they speak perfect English. Germans speak perfect English.
Yeah. So, but so the reason that it cannot be done online or with all those other tools, that their rules are not modernized during this time. They haven't done no effort during the years because it is, of course, technology is not something which is suddenly there. You guys adapted, you guys are a young federation and are more easily adaptable to that situation. The federation, when you want to change that needs to be voted about. but the situation you could have quite legally make new rules, make sort of circumstances where every country accepted that it was done online, etc. That was well possible, but they don't. I agree with you. They seem not to be happy to facilitate that.
There's a lack of willingness. They don't want to do it.
You know, other part is the translation. As I mentioned to you before, I understand German reasonable well. I won't say 100% perfect, but I understand within the 90% at least. So I listened to the German translation and vice versa. So the English translation when German speaking was, because we had also could have a little ears in and listen to what was said in the translations. And I don't blame the translators, but they are people who are professional translators and they don't always understand the subject. So I hear somebody saying something in German and in translation in English is not one-on-one what they really meant, and vice versa. So you get a misconception from the people who listen to the translations, and that can be quite significant because our own president, when we were sitting there, I had to tell sometimes, now it was what they meant was this, because that's what they really said in German. And that is just, that's not to blame the translators because I think they do a good job. But I think it is just a lack. In order to get the complete concept, the right context of the translation, you need to know the subject, and they were not all. There were 4 translators. All 4 of them were not nativist. Not that I had a lot of problems with it, but they were all 4 non-nativist. And that makes a slight, and that's why, although you say you need all those translators, you also, at the same time, get people in who are not always 100% translating it right.
Yeah, and I mean, you can have people translate on a Zoom call the same way that you can have someone translate in person. The technology allows that to happen, but I think the reason why they're doing this is because they have no willingness, and because, as they showed in 2016, they have no intention of leaving the positions that they're in. And that's my opinion.
In my opinion, I don't think you're far from the truth.
Yeah, I might be right. I might not. But I mean, the only thing that can't be questioned is the way that this has been handled is a complete disaster. And this is one of the reasons why people have lost faith in this institution. And the other thing that upsets me about this is that they do everything behind closed doors. All this information is information that should be public. All these documents are public documents because they're of an international institution, and no one really has access to this. And the other thing that I notice is that not even the members of the federations are aware of these things taking place. This is a select group of national representatives that understand that this is going on, but the general public doesn't understand this. And I think that it's something that we should be talking more about. And the more people are informed, the more they can participate, the more that they can volunteer, the more that they can do something about it, because knowledge is power. But if we block this knowledge and only a few of us know, then we have less things to worry about as the leaders who are trying to get their way. That's my opinion.
There is also quite an interesting point. One of the things which was voted on was in the 2016 Congress was to extend the number of persons from 3 to 5. So the two, the EC and the CC as they call it. So instead of, and to merge those two together. So there's the European delegate, or I don't think it's called delegate, European person and the non-European person, who is to make then the total of 5, which is those positions already exist. Make that a permanent, merge those two together, and have always a group of 5 who make the decisions. That was voted in by a huge majority. That has been thrown out by the next day. St. Peters came back on that and said, by Austrian law, I don't know how big of an expert he is in Austrian law, because the International Federation is based in Austria, they have to act according to the Austrian law, according to him. That can well be true. By Austrian law, that is not allowed. So I'm not a legal expert, but I think that is quite interesting. I have never heard of this sort of thing in any European country. So I try to find that law into the law books, which you can find online. And they talk about a minimum of having a president, a secretary, and a treasurer. That same law he uses to say that you cannot extend past those 3 persons. And that's why you cannot have a committee of 5, but you can have only a committee of 3.
But the law says minimum 3, not maximum.
That is how I read it. But I'm not a legal expert, as said. Paul, who was a legal counsel representative, he has also looked into it, and he cannot find it either, besides that where it says where we translate it as a minimum of 3 people. So he never has shown any proof that it cannot be 5 persons or 6, 7. What you normally expect in any country, in general, you need to have that minimum. You need to have a president, you need to have a treasurer, and you need to have a secretary. In most countries, that's a legal requirement. But the other part, I never heard it anywhere else, and I cannot believe that that is in Australia. But he says that's in Australian law, and nobody who is fighting that, because what does those other countries know about Australian law? Nobody knows anything about Australian law. So it's easy to say that. If that is true, show everybody that's true, but he doesn't.
I think if that's true, the INF should have an expert in Austrian law, and this expert should be consulted by all of the countries before they put in any petition. And if John Peters is an expert in Austrian law, why doesn't he dispute it when they propose it? Why does he dispute it after it has been decided? I think this is arbitrary, and he clearly is capable of getting away with it, and there's no one that can dispute it. And I also think that the federations are complicit in this. The federations are upset. They don't agree with what they're doing, but they continued supporting this institution. They continue paying their fees. They continue voting or validating the elections that they take place. Every time that John Peters tells them that they can't do something, they just close their arms and are upset. And that's it. But that doesn't matter because they're not doing anything about it. I personally think if anyone is listening and they are members of these federations, it would be important for them to have a close communication with the representatives and ask them and tell them how they feel about this that happened in 2016, or what is happening now in 2020, or what could be the future of this institution. I honestly think that if this institution does not evolve, it's going to lose even more relevance, because right now it's irrelevant, but eventually it's going to die off because people are going to get sick of paying an institution that is not doing their job. I think, or what I've noticed is they spend more time fighting about these processes than they actually do promoting naturism.
Yeah, and I'm totally agreeing with you at that point. Hence, the New Zealand Federation has left the INF meanwhile. They are certainly after Portugal, where they 2 years later, where they did the same kind of act with the secretary role. They just dismissed the candidate, which was from Portugal actually, but we put him forward for the role of secretary, and they just throw that candidacy out. It's not. They find some legal rule within the rules to throw that out, and again, only Jean Peters was the only candidacy, when I'm correct. Yeah, what's the use? What's the use when you, in my opinion, they should concentrate more about promoting nativism, talking, for instance, where they were tasked with by the federations. For instance, to use that example again, they were tasked to contact organizations like Facebook, like Instagram, like Google, like the Microsofts, to make sure that we have a platform to stand on, to talk and spread the word. But for a certain way understandable from those organizations, there is a misconception in those organizations about what we stand for, and they understand why they are doing hard.
I agree.
But that's why you need to get into conversation with them, and you cannot do that as the Maximum Federation or the New Zealand Federation or with any other country. When you do that as the International Federation, then you have a far more bigger standpoint to talk to them. And that's our international organization, although they are based in America, they are international organizations, so we should contact them as an international organization.
I completely agree with you. And I think there's a ton of things that this federation could be and should be doing. But I mean, I understood this during the 2018 World Congress, when one of the representatives of one of the countries lifted up her hand to ask what was a smartphone. And she said she was proud of this. She said that they only use fax, that they, you know, I think they don't even have a landline. They don't even talk on the phone. So, and this is one of the people that supports this board of directors. And this is the same way that the board of directors thinks. What is a smartphone? What is an app? What is censorship online? So, you know, the only thing that we can do is, I don't know, I think we can do a lot of things, but I'm losing my faith in this institution. And I think that it's just all a waste of time. If this has been going on at least since 2016, and there hasn't been any significant change. So I don't blame the New Zealand Federation for just pulling out, or the ANR, the US National Federation that does not want to be a part of this, or any other person who is not willing to support a federation because they don't do anything about this. So I mean, if I wasn't already a member of the Mexican Federation, I probably would not be a member of it, just because I feel like they should pull out. I was president, and during the time that I was president, I had hope that we could do something about this, but it's constant, just dismissing, oh, what do you know? Oh, you're a small country. Oh, you don't even speak the language. It's just this arrogance.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And it's exactly true, and it's repetitive. And I hope that something is gonna change. But when?
We all do, but I think that it's not going to happen anytime soon. And the problem is we're wasting time. And I think that instead of spending energy in something that is not worth it, we could spend the same energy building something that is worth it. That's the way I see it.
Yeah.
So Hans, is there anything else that you would like to mention before we end this conversation?
I want to at least thank you for this conversation, and thank you do a good job on the international platform, and that's why I was quite willing to do this.
Thank you,
For
Hans.
me, this subject is quite over and done with. I've shown my protests during that time. I basically got told off that, like you said, the same way by Jean Peters from you don't speak German. Why do you then send me an email in German? And I react on what you write me. My German is not as good as his German. I totally agree. But I understand it perfectly well. And I think at least that you you give a bigger input to the international promotion of nativism than the International Federation done. And when we all those influencers on the internet keep on doing their good job and keep with the subject, then we may get somewhere. And we should just work together, all the people who are busy on the platform.
I agree.
And congratulations with your wedding, by the way.
Thank you very much. I'm very thankful for the support that I've received from the community. I just don't understand. I do this passionately. I want this to be a career, but I also do this, and I always started doing this, and I've always done this out of passion. And I get really upset when I see the opportunities that are wasted. For me, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of resources. It's a waste of opportunities. And I know that there's a lot of very valuable people in these organizations, a lot of valuable leaders that are very interested in making a difference. And I admire their work and their patience, but I also feel a little bit bad that they want to protect the organization so much that they're not willing to do anything that could put it in danger to make a difference. So they love it so much that they rather put up with this garbage, this bullshit, in order to maintain the organization. And for me, what's more important is the costs. And for me, naturism is more important than an organization that is not doing their job. But let's hope that something does change. And if not, in the meantime, we'll continue having these uncomfortable conversations so more people can be informed. So thank you, Hans, for being brave enough to, talking about this, something that you present, something that was told to you that you were mistaking because you don't speak the language, because you don't know Austrian law, because you blah, 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 blah,
blah. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Hector.
Thank you. So I'm going to end this recording. If you guys are interested in reviewing any of the documents that were discussed during this conversation, you can find it in the link below.